About Operation Northwoods. It was a proposed 1962 false flag operation by the DoD and the CIA to be carried out by the CIA to commit acts of terrorism on Americans and blame them on Cuba. So JFK, the president, rejected the proposal. What do you make that this was on the table, Operation Northwoods?
So it's interesting. First, I'm glad that JFK rejected it. That's a good sign. So we have to understand that good ideas are oftentimes born from bad ideas. Again, Cuban Missile Crisis, mass hysteria in the United States about nuclear war from Cuba, missiles blowing up American cities faster than we could even see them coming. It makes sense to me that a president would go to especially the part of CIA, which is the Special Activities Division. It makes perfect sense to me that the president would go to a division called Special Activities, whose job it is to create, crazy ideas that have presidential approval, but nobody knows they exist. So it makes sense that he would challenge a group like that to come up with any wacky idea, right? Come up with anything. Just let's start with something, because we can't bring nothing to the table. We have to do something about this Cuban issue. And then that's how an operation like that could reasonably be born. Not because anybody wants to do it, but because they were tasked by the president to come up with 5 ideas, and it was one of the ideas. That still happens to this day.
Did you hear the ex-CIA officer? He said that still happens till this day.
That still happens to this day.
Hey YouTube world, Harvest is plenty. I hope all is well. Thanks for stopping by to check out the video. I really appreciate your viewership. Make sure that you like, share, comment, and subscribe. So to be honest, guys, I really was not going to post this particular video at this time. I had other things that I wanted to upload for you guys. But I went to pick up some food. And as I'm sitting there waiting on my food order, I'm watching the TV screen that they had up in the place. And the FBI director comes on. And he was warning us to be more vigilant during the holiday season because he said that we could experience some type of terror attack in America. And every day is always a new warning about a possible terror attack from sleeper cells. Whether you watch the TV news or if you guys look at YouTube and you look at other people's channels, you have other preppers, you have ex-military guys, ex-intelligence guys. People all over are warning about something could possibly be happening in America soon. And so I wanted to put this video out. It had me thinking about Operations Northwoods. And I wondered if Operations Northwoods was in effect. Well, not that particular operation, but an operation just like it. For those of you who don't know what Operations Northwoods is, it was a declassified operation that took place back during the JFK presidential administration. And it was because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. If you guys don't remember, Russia was trying to put missiles in Cuba, which is in our back door or in our backyard, and America, wasn't going for that. And so what they wanted to do is they wanted to go to war with Cuba and get Castro out of office. They want to conduct what is called regime change. But they needed a pretext to be able to do so. So plans was drawn up and presented to JFK of what will be a good idea to them as a pretext to go to war with Cuba. One of the plans was to do an attack on an American military base by our government, but we would blame that on Cuba. Another thing would be to shoot down a commercial airplane carrying passengers. The airplane would be filled with college kids over the break, and they would actually shoot down the plane and blame that attack on Cuba. This is our American government saying this, right? They also came up with an idea to dress up as Cubans and commit active shooter massacres on American people in various cities, sort of like a Mumbai, India attack. Yes, they would dress up as Cubans, probably with disguises or whatever, and they would literally open fire and kill American citizens. Active shooter attacks, and they would blame it on Cubans. JFK, he rejected that idea. he thought it was so atrocious and egregious that he actually fired the people who were involved with coming up with that idea and presenting it to him. And we do know what happened to JFK. Eventually, he got his head blown off in Dallas. And so when I start thinking about the constant warnings by the FBI director and the intel that they're probably getting, it got me thinking about Operation Northwoods. And I said, what if a new plan is at play? And what if American operations guys or intelligence guys secretly go out and carry out atrocities against America in American cities on American soil and blame it on Iran, Syria, North Korea, or whoever else we consider to be an enemy nation that we need to go to war with? That's Operation Northwoods. This is a real operation that was proposed to President JFK. It was declassified. That's how many people found out about it. And so I'm going to share with you some details about that. Take a look. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Also, as we are approaching Thanksgiving, we are approaching Black Friday. Many people like to travel for Thanksgiving. Many people like to participate in the Black Friday sales and rush these stores. I would say, please be careful. Please make sure that you pray without ceasing. You stay prepared. You stay alert. Protect yourself at all times during these holidays. You just never know what's cooking. These demons have been invading the earth for a while. We have fallen angels who are probably here as well. So we don't really know what's going on in the spiritual realm. But just protect yourself at all times. This is some crazy times. It's one big mess. I love you guys. Take care.
Yet, while CIA spooks were coming up with all sorts of crazy and zany ideas to either kill or humiliate Castro on the international stage, the Joint Chiefs of Staff, supreme commanders of the various branches of the U.S. Armed Forces, had a much more straightforward idea. They say that to a hammer, every problem looks like a nail, and the U.S. military is very much a hammer, and Castro was very much a particularly troublesome nail. At first, they floated the idea of simply bombing Castro, not secretly, the way the CIA planned to do in a bid to avoid international outrage, but much more overtly with a strike by military aircraft. Short, sweet, and very much to the point. Within seconds, Castro would be less a bothersome nail that needed hammering and more a floating cloud of ashes. When the Joint Chiefs were reminded, however, that this was not the way the US did things, they realized that if they wanted to kill Castro dead, and they definitely did, then they would need an excuse to do so. Thus, the Hammers decided to get sneaky and came up with one of the most morally abhorrent plans to remove Castro from power in US history. With the CIA elbows deep in Operation Mongoose, the official codename for the removal of Castro, the Joint Chiefs decided that the best way to kill or remove Castro would be through military force. Yet an unmerited invasion of Cuba would have not just disastrous political consequences, but would never be supported by the American people themselves. The US would need a reason to go to war against the tiny island nation, something that every American could get behind and support. Under the codename of Operation Northwoods, a series of plans to justify the invasion of Cuba were drawn up. Known as false flag operations, the Joint Chiefs drew up a series of plans to conduct hostile operations against its own military and civilians, as well as those of neighboring nations, while making it look as if the attacks were being carried out by Cuban operatives. To achieve their ultimate objective of a Cuban invasion, the Joint Chiefs made the following proposals, all to be carried out by clandestine American agents. Number 1. Attacking Guantanamo Bay Naval Station, either with teams of fake commandos who would then be captured, or by lobbing mortar shells into the installation from outside of its boundaries. Aircraft could be purposefully set on fire and sabotaged by individuals inside the base, and a ship, either a real Navy ship with actual sailors aboard or a drone ship, could be blown up in Guantanamo Bay itself, with the blame falling on Cuban military forces. This would be purposefully reminiscent of the Remember the Maine incident in 1898, where a U.S. battleship was sunk in Havana Harbor, with the death of 260 American soldiers. The incident helped spur the American public to support a war against Spain and secure Cuban semi-independence. Number 2. The Pentagon would foster a homegrown terror campaign in Florida, Washington, and possibly other cities, all perpetuated by fake Cuban operatives and blamed on Cuban refugees seeking haven in the United States. This would include the gunning down of American civilians on the street and the planting of bombs in public places, all with the intent of whipping up the American public into a frenzy against Cuban refugees and thus Cuba. Number 3. Perhaps because even the Joint Chiefs thought at the time that murdering American civilians might be too cold-blooded, they also suggested that instead of terror attacks against American citizens, they could launch a series of fake terror attacks against Cuban refugees, or sink boats which they point out could be real or simulated full of refugees. The purpose of this campaign would be to foster a sense of pity for refugees from Americans, who would surely support a war against the evil Fidel Castro and his Cuban government. Number 4. Supporting Cuban efforts to subvert governments of Haiti, Dominican Republic, Guatemala, and Nicaragua. The U.S. was fully aware that Castro was secretly funneling aid to guerrilla movements in those nations in the hopes of expanding communism across the Caribbean. The Joint Chiefs suggested actually helping those plans along and exposing them so as to draw international consternation against Cuba and justify an invasion in the name of keeping the peace. The plan listed as an example raids by the U.S. Air Force flying fake Cuban B-26 or C-46 aircraft into the Dominican Republic, where they could launch attacks against sugarcane fields, even using Soviet incendiary munitions. These attacks would be supplemented by fake messages from Cuba to the communist underground present in the Dominican Republic, and even shipments of weapons and explosives which could be conveniently intercepted on the beaches. Number 5. MiG-type aircraft flown by U.S. pilots could be used to harass civilian airliners or attack surface shipping vessels. Military drone aircraft could be targeted and destroyed by these fake MiGs in order to add to the credibility of the Cuban threat. The plan acknowledges the difficulty in procuring a real MiG, but notes that a credible copy could be developed in just about 3 months. Number 6. Hijacking attempts against air and naval craft by fake Cuban operatives, which were of course designed to fail or succeed only temporarily. Number 7. The shooting down of a chartered civilian aircraft, which would be secretly a repainted U.S. Air Force plane. The aircraft would be remotely piloted, and in the press, the American people could be told that it was full of U.S. college students off on a trip to South America. This plan involved the drone aircraft and a real aircraft, which would really be boarded by fake passengers. The drone aircraft would rendezvous with the real aircraft at a determined location off the Florida coast, and the drone aircraft would then continue flying the flight path filled with civilian aviation agencies. The real aircraft would immediately dive to minimum altitude and fly back to an auxiliary airfield in Eglin Air Force Base, with the fake passengers offloaded. Once flying over Cuba, the drone would transmit a mayday with a pre-recorded message saying that it was under attack by Cuban MiGs, and then the drone would be remote detonated via radio. This would allow civilian radio installations around the Western Hemisphere to tell the U.S. what had happened, rather than the U.S. itself trying to convince people of what happened. Number 8. While just 15 to 20 miles off the Cuban coast, a U.S. Air Force fighter jet would radio a distress call, saying he was being attacked by Cuban MiGs. The jet would then dive to a minimum altitude and fly back to an auxiliary airfield in Eglin Air Force Base, where the jet's tail number would be changed and the pilot, flying under an alias, would resume his real identity and rejoin his real squadron. Then a U.S. submarine would secretly disperse jet parts and a parachute off the waters of Cuba, as if to make it seem like a U.S. Air Force jet had really been shot down. The Joint Chiefs quickly took their proposal straight to President John F. Kennedy, who read through the briefing document and immediately denied it. Appalled at the lengths to which the Joint Chiefs were willing to go to justify an invasion of Cuba, President Kennedy would go on to fire General Lyman Lemnitzer, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Though Operation Northwoods would have indisputably achieved its objectives of giving the U.S. a pretense to go to war against Cuba, President Kennedy could not stomach the sheer horror of some of what the Joint Chiefs seemed ready to do in order to get their invasion. Kennedy's strong and immediate reaction to Operation Northwoods would go on to make the Joint Chiefs believe that he was soft on Cuba and create a rift between himself and the military, which would last until the Cuban Missile Crisis. Thankfully, once again, President Kennedy would stand up to the Joint Chiefs during the crisis and reject the use of force, potentially saving the world from World War III. In the end, Operation Northwoods was an immoral and un-American proposal to justify a needless war and proof of why civilian leadership of the military is vital for the health and well-being of any democracy.